I always remember feeling very insecure about the way I looked. And I remember it was a very traumatic, um, shocking feeling to leave the only language that I knew at that point. I carried that with me for a very long, long time.
Welcome back to the Immigrant Experience in America, where we explore what it really means to build identity, belonging, and purpose across cultures. Today's guest has sung alongside some of the biggest names in music history: Pink Floyd, Sting, Michael Jackson, Foreigner, Pat Benatar, and George Benson. But behind the applause was a much deeper story. Born in Japan and relocated to suburban America at the age of 4, Machan Taylor spent decades navigating identity, invisibility, trauma, and the search for belonging between cultures. Her memoir, Naked Out Loud, is a powerful reflection of race, family dysfunction, emotional survival, and reinvention. And finally, finding healing later in life. Machan, welcome to the Immigrant Experience in America.
Thank you, Simone. So nice to be here with you. Thank
Lovely to
you.
have you on the show, and I have no doubt our guest is will enjoy your story today. So, if you don't mind, you immigrated from Japan to the U.S. at 4 years old. What do you remember emotionally about that transition, if any memories?
Yeah, I was actually 4.5, so it was just before I started school. My memories are, a little bit like a dream, having been so young when that happened. But I do remember very clearly the emotional impact that really has stayed with me all my life. And, having to leave my family. My mother was Japanese. My father was American. He was an American soldier stationed in Japan after World War II. So my mother was categorized as a war bride, and I'm a war baby. So yeah, it was post World War II. At a certain point, my father decided to retire from active military duty, and he became inactive, which meant he needed to find work. And being an American, it was difficult for him to find a job in Japan. So that was the reason why we then left Japan in 1959 into 1960. So my older sister, who was also born in Japan, was 9 years older than I. So I was 4.5. She was 13, which is, a big gap. And I remember it was a very traumatic, shocking feeling to leave the only language that I knew at that point, the only food, the only environment, the only family that I knew at that point. Um, I was very close to my grandmother, loved my grandmother, and it was really, really hard leaving her and leaving my family there. And, to be honest with you, a lot of the story, the details of the story, and the original emotional trauma was something that I had to uncover through the process of therapy and a lot of work that I've done on myself over the years. Um, so, I'm much clearer now than I was when I was younger about what the real root of the trauma, the experience of leaving Japan and leaving my roots and coming to America. But I know now at this point in my life that that was sort of the original scarring, if you will.
And so much of us can relate. And it sometimes takes decades before we can put words to explain or even talk about it.
Yes.
I know the more I speak to people, I tend to lean towards the idea that it's a luxury. It's a luxury to be able to decode it, to
Hmm.
get therapy for it, to find the words and to even have a conversation about it and to even say I'm in healing, I'm in the other side of it because a lot of people are still in the disorientation of what that is. They knew
Yes.
something happened to them, but they can't really explain it.
Yeah, that's so true. Yeah, that's really true. And I feel very lucky, I'm blessed to feel at this point in my life, I'm going to be 70 in September. So,
You
uh,
look
you know,
amazing.
thank you. Thank you, but it's real. It's really happening. I mean, time flies. So, so I have a lot of time. I have a lot of retrospection. I've had the luxury, as you say, um, to have had this time in my life to do the work to help to bring healing, to help bring understanding, to help bring a sense of peace within myself about what happened when I was young.
Wow. And it's so beautiful to I heard somebody say, I interviewed a therapist recently who said that we're bionic. And sometimes, as hyphenated immigrant people, hyphenated immigrant American
Mm,
people, some people find us, that's part of the threat or fear of who we are because we're so bionic. We come in and we have to learn a new language, we have to learn a new culture, workplace, social environment, and so much. And we're packing on to what we already have. And we're
mhm,
able to just like bend and be flexible to whatever is required of us. And oftentimes just excel at tremendous levels. And
mhm.
so, it can be painful, but for those who are listening, and if you're in the throes of the pain of it, just know that this podcast exists to help you get words, to find support, and it does feel better. It does get to a place where you have the words, and it start making sense, and you start feeling more at home within your body. Because I've
Mhm.
walked through it myself, so it does get better for those of you who are in the throes of the culture shock and the disorientation. We can totally relate to that.
It's wonderful that you're doing this podcast because, uh, when I was younger, I thought that I was alone and weird, and, I was the only person that was experiencing these feelings of feeling like an outcast and so on and so forth. And so for you to be telling these stories and exposing these stories is so wonderful because we're not alone. We're not alone, and this and America was built on immigrants. And even though we're in a very challenging time, let's say, in our society with the issue of immigration and immigrants, the fact is that America was built by immigrants. So this is such an important story to be amplifying. So good for you.
It's my pleasure. It really
Yeah.
is. It came out of my own pain, my own journey of trying to figure out what happened to me. I couldn't explain, and I just knew I wasn't myself anymore. And therapy
Mm,
wasn't helping, but it was through the conversation of relating to other people and finding the words like, oh, that's what that's called. That's why I
mm,
was feeling that way. That's why I have isolated or why I kind of protected myself in that way. I didn't understand why I was behaving that way. And so it's here for people to who are on the other side considering coming over to kind of get a perspective as to what the changes might feel like or might be experienced.
mhm.
But for those who are in it to be able to find healing. So it's my pleasure to do this work. When did you realize that you didn't fully belong?
Oh, it was pretty early. We when we came to America, because my father was from New Jersey, we ended up We took a ship, we traveled across the Pacific Ocean on a ship, and then by train across America and ended up in New York and then into New Jersey. So we settled in a very white, suburban, middle class neighborhood in a small town in New Jersey called Wharton, New Jersey. It's a very small town. And it was one of those very typical post World War II track homes where all the homes kind of look the same. It was built as a community, and it was definitely very Anglo-Saxon, very white, very middle class. And because my father was military, he was the benefactor of the GI Bill. So it was a great thing that my parents could afford to buy a house because of the GI Bill. And so we ended up in this, very, as we say, waspy neighborhood. And right away, I knew just by looking around uh, that I didn't look like anybody else. And everybody was either blonde hair, blue eyed, and very, very so called American looking, right? Compared to me. There were no other Asian children or Asian families in our neighborhood. There were no Latino or Black Americans in our neighborhood. It was very, very obvious, that I kind of stood out. And you have to remember, this is a very different time. This is the 60s, the 1960s. So there were still very anti-Japanese feelings in the culture. Wasn't that far, past the war times. Kids would say things, kids can be very mean, but obviously children learn from their parents or older people about comments and feelings towards people that look different or seem different. So I remember being in grammar school and being called a Jap. And I wore glasses when I was little. So I was, four eyes. Kids can be so mean sometimes. But I remember feeling, very much like an outcast.
The funny thing about it is I've had this experience multiple times just looking at you phenotypically. You can tell that you're not fully Asian, but you look a little bit more like your dad. You don't really have that full typical Asian eye either. You look,
Right.
yeah, right. You have a certain look and appearance about you. So that's so interesting that you felt so vividly different in an environment like that, or people would make you feel that way just because you look slightly different, like you have
Mm-hmm.
makes us. It's just amazing how we find the differences just tend to separate us so much, and I'm
Mm-hmm.
trying to understand versus the fact that you have so much similarity. Your skin tone looks more compared to someone like me, right?
Right.
Your hair
Right.
texture, your straight hair, the way you, but yet that
Right.
doesn't really count. It's about that little minor piece of you that's different.
Yeah. Well, and also my mother was clearly Japanese. So if anybody saw my mother, they would know right away. And my mother too, when she was younger, she had really dark hair, black hair, and very clearly, Japanese. It was very, very distinct. So I think that was part of it too, because kids see your parents and they know right away, right?
That's interesting. I actually heard a story recently, sometime last year, maybe 2024, of a parent who is a father is Anglo, or these terms are so problematic sometimes, right? I
I
think
know.
his parents are from Ireland, is what I remember. I think, and the mom is Indian American, but
Mhm.
the little girl came out and she looks very pale. She looks mostly like her dad's side of family.
Mm.
And but when she goes to school, she's like maybe 5 or 6. They're telling her, we can't be friends with you because your mommy is so and so. So I can understand what you're saying.
Wow.
So they're saying that even though you look like us, and typically if we didn't know anything about you, we would just be children. But because we know your mom is darker than your dad, we can't be friends with you. And these are children
Really?
5 or 6 years old. I was floored. It really saddened my heart. But they're getting it
Oh,
obviously from some adult that they're around.
of
Because
course.
they're
Because
so
children don't, to me, they're generally not naturally like that. They're not naturally discriminating, right? They have to learn that kind of judgment. I'm surprised to hear that's happening now, though. It's a shame. It's a shame.
I know. How did growing up visibly different in suburban America shaped your self-worth as a child? Being just in that neighborhood that you first landed.
I remember always feeling less than. I always remember feeling very insecure about the way I looked. I just grew up really feeling very insecure. And I think not only was it the complication of coming from a biracial family, a multiracial, biracial marriage and family, my father also turned out to be an alcoholic. He was a gambler, a womanizer. It was very, very dysfunctional. When we came to America, it was very difficult for my mother dealing with racism, dealing with, having lost her family. I mean, she left everyone behind in Japan and really only returned once before she died. It's when my grandmother was dying of cancer in the 1970s. My mother went back to Japan, and that was the only trip that she made back to Japan. So, and this may be true for a lot of immigrant families. I'm not sure. I think the challenges that my mother had to face, along with the fact that my father ended up having a lot of problems and therefore, making it very difficult for us as a family, that also contributed to my lack of feeling grounded and feeling secure and feeling safe. And so that, that mixture was just a very sort of toxic mixture for me to grow up in. And therefore always feeling like I was never good enough.
I understand what you're saying. Wow. So I mean, it drives home um, I'm pretty conservative when it comes to family values. And it drives home the fact of just how important it is to parent a two-parent home. And just even when the times are hard, like trying to work it out or providing that stability for a kid, like when it's absent, those of us
Hmm.
who've experienced it, like I know what you're talking about, know that something fractured happened to you, but so
Yes.
it's different from like what other people who haven't experienced that feels like, and it's very visceral in your body and your experience of
Um,
life, right?
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely.
And trying to find that groundedness as you get older as an adult and to heal can
Hmm.
be quite a challenge, and some people just never get past it, right? It follows them for
Yeah.
decades. um,
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, but how much did your family environment deepen that feeling of disconnection? And you just shared that, really.
Hmm.
Just your father having some, challenges and how that affected you as you got older.
The first 5 years or so of a child's life is paramount in regards to how the foundation of our personalities are formed and informed. And I think, and I'm sure there are a lot of your listeners that can relate if they came to this country as children. how really disruptive to one's sense of self that is. And so having that as my beginning, and then on top of that, to have had the dysfunction that was occurring because of my father's problems, and I think also the depression that my mother clearly had gone into because of the loss of her family and her culture, and then having to deal with my father. So it was this very toxic mix of emotions to have to grow up with. So yeah, I carried that with me for a very long time. You know, it took a lot of my adult life, and has taken a lot of my adult life, to work on, to trying to figure out why how I am, and how I turned out the way that I've turned out, and why I have felt in certain ways about myself and about the world. And but I've done a lot of work, so I feel like I'm in a really good place, you know, now in my life. But it's not always easy doing that work. It really takes a certain commitment and desire to want to unravel the mysteries, you know.
Very true. Yes, it takes determination, persistence, and definitely trying to
Hmm.
understand it and understanding yourself, being patient with yourself as you go through the process. And
Hmm.
it does get better. It does get better. So, for those who are struggling through that,
Hmm.
um, just keep going, keep seeking help, and I hope you get sooner than later get to a more comfortable, more healed place in your life, if you're walking
Yes,
through that.
exactly. Yes.
So you went on to perform with some of the biggest names in music history. Did success change your sense of identity and belonging?
Yeah, it definitely did affect my sense about myself. It certainly gave me more confidence in certain ways, but it was also sort of a band-aid on the problem. So, yeah, certainly having a sense of outer success and making money and traveling, and you know, your life on the outside looking sort of glamorous. You know, I had some pretty glamorous times working in the career that I've had. And to say there was anything wrong with that or bad, it was all, you know, pretty amazing, and I feel very fortunate. But at the same time, it was sort of a cover up for what I was really feeling internally because of my childhood, because of all the things that I had grown up with. And, you know, it took me really, even though I knew all along, subconsciously, I knew what was happening internally for me. I would say it really took me until 40, right around when I turned 40, to really make some serious changes, and to really take seriously the work, my internal emotional and spiritual work. So it took that long, but better late than never.
Right, right.
Yeah.
So before I forget, I'm thinking of wondering, like, you said your mom went back to Japan in the 70s before her passing.
Hmm.
How did she manage based on what you can remember and observe and have words to even explain as you're a child growing up, and oftentimes we don't understand our parents, but how did she
Right.
manage the trauma of leaving home, and the trauma that she's now in and living in a society that she doesn't fit anymore? I can't even imagine. And then the language is different as well. How did she manage all of that?
Um, I think my mother, ended up in many ways very angry, which, kind of correlates to depression because, in a way, the flip side of anger is sadness. And so I think my mother carried a lot of sadness and kind of, I think it was also a generational thing where, she didn't really talk about her feelings. Um, that wasn't something that she did. That generation in particular, and I think Japanese culture also, yeah, I think even now, they're very prideful people. They're not necessarily demonstrative, so you don't necessarily see, and maybe it's very different now with young people, but my mother's generation, hugging and demonstrative ways of showing affection and emotion was not typical. Um, so I think my mother carried a lot of pain, and it turned into a lot of bitterness and anger later in her life. And unfortunately, she would have never been comfortable seeking therapy or seeking help or someone to talk to about her problems. It's unfortunate.
Did she ever find some semblance of a community, Japanese women, other Asian women?
A few she did over the years. She did discover some other Asian Japanese women that were living in our little area in New Jersey. But I remember one of them eventually moved to Florida, and another woman passed away. So it was just a very small handful of women that she connected with. And she did, not to say she didn't have any friends. She did have a few women friends in the neighborhood that were really lovely people. But I think generally speaking, my mom kind of kept to herself and kept a lot of her feelings to herself.
Right. I'm
Yeah.
thinking of your sister who is older, and I've noticed this pattern of I'm the older sister as well, and I'm shorter, and my younger sister tends to be the younger sisters seem to always come up being taller. I don't know, just pay attention. I don't know what it is. The younger sisters are always taller. I've seen it in so many circumstances, almost like no one can tell me otherwise. They
Oh,
are
how
always taller,
funny.
right?
That's
So
funny.
I wonder, you know, is she so aware of that experience like you are being the younger one? Because typically the younger children don't really sense the type of trauma that an older child might pick up as they're growing in the environment. How did
Mm.
your sister fare?
Yeah, she was a lot like my mother, and my older sister is still alive and around, and she's not necessarily one to talk about her feelings either. You have to remember she was 13 when we came to America, and at that time, there were no programs for English as a second language. So they took my sister at 13 and they put her in the third or fourth grade so she could learn how to speak English, which I know it must have been very traumatic for her to have, and humiliating, to have to deal with that. But when I was writing my book and I spoke to my sister about this very thing, and of course now she's 79, and she said, oh well, I don't remember it being so bad. So either she blocked it out, or um maybe at this point in her life the feelings have subsided, of what she experienced when she was 13. um but I can't imagine that it was comfortable for her, you know.
What was it like navigating the music industry as a Japanese American woman in a predominantly white and male space?
Yeah, again, it was a really different time. There was no Michelle Yeoh. There was no K-pop. There were no Asian American actresses and actors on television. Um, I had no role models at that point in time. So it was really strange for me. And also, I always felt like I had to work a lot harder to be recognized for my talents or to get jobs, singing jobs. And just there was always that sense, and I think it comes out of that feeling of not feeling good enough. So if I'm not good enough, then I have to try harder. I have to work harder. I have to push harder in myself. So I always, have referred to the feeling of this sort of fire in my belly. Like I always felt this sense of drive since I'm very young. Like I always felt like I have to really try hard. And so I think that feeling served me well. Um, and I was very lucky. And, I people have told me I'm a great singer. I don't ever refer to myself that way or have never really felt that way about myself because I just always felt like, yeah, okay, I can do this, but I need to work hard and I need to prove myself. So I think that that's the feeling that I had as a result of being in a predominantly, at that time, predominantly white male industry. And I think it's still predominantly male run industry, like many industries still. Yeah.
Right. And such a different time back in the 60s. My goodness, I can't even imagine. But you survived, you're
Yeah.
on the other side of it and with success.
Yes, and I'm knock on wood, very, very lucky, very blessed. So I'm grateful. But it was a very different time.
You've said performance became more like both protection and prison. Can you talk to us a bit about that?
Um, yeah, I toured with Pink Floyd, and I know these are older sounding artists now, but Pink Floyd in 1987, 88. So we're going back almost 40 years. Next year it'll be, I just realized this recently, it'll be the beginning of the 40th anniversary of that tour that I did with Pink Floyd. It's crazy. So I toured with Pink Floyd, Pat Benatar, George Benson in the 80s. Sting was much later. But that time in the business was it was sort of the beginning of these really hyped out rock concert productions, big, big, big productions. Now it's commonplace to see, Taylor Swift or whoever it is with these massive stages and massive production, audiovisual productions and dancers and, pyrotechnics and the whole thing. But the 80s was really sort of the beginning of this incredible period of big rock concert productions. So it was very glamorous and it felt very high end. And, when I toured with Pink Floyd and even Patty and, a number of people, we were traveling in private jets and we were staying in five-star hotels and, personal caterers for the band and personal security for the band. And, it was a very unrealistic kind of existence. But that's what it was. And that's what that life, will give you if you're lucky enough to get into that part of the industry. But the reason why I've said on a personal level, it was fantastic, but also a little bit of a personal prison is that, yes, on the outside, my life looked like it was all together and fabulous. But internally, I was really struggling. I was really struggling with imposter syndrome and feeling like I wasn't good enough and I didn't belong there. And I know this is not an uncommon feeling, whether it's the entertainment industry or whether it's business or whatever. I know that now, at this point in my life, I know a lot of people suffer with imposter syndrome, but people don't necessarily talk about it. So that's sort of what I mean about it being a little bit of a prison, because I had to hide those feelings of inadequacy. It's not something that we talked about, not
Right.
readily.
Yes, and I understand people wanting to protect that information because it might make you appear, it might affect your career and your appearance to people, and you always have
Hmm.
to, in the American culture, appear strong, like confident, you have it all together. So,
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
right. So at the height of your career, we may not, oftentimes as onlookers, we may not be able to see what's really going on behind the scenes. So what was happening emotionally behind the scenes that people couldn't see in that time period? Behind the glamour, right?
Yeah, I think I sort of said that a few minutes ago, in that, yeah, I was really hiding my feelings of feeling inadequate and feeling like I didn't belong. And I know it must be really strange for people to hear that, especially if you're, looking at someone's life and it looks like they have it all together. Uh, but underneath, we can never, as they say, never judge a book by its cover, because usually the truth of what's going on is something very different than what we can see. And I think,
Right.
there's a, a lot more willingness, excuse me, of the younger generation of not only people in the music industry, entertainment industry, to talk about their feelings more, the reality of how they're feeling. I think it's starting to become part of the culture a little bit more, which I think is really good. I think it's very good if people are willing to not be so protective of their internal world, because I think that we all, as human beings, have trauma in a lot of different ways. Maybe little traumas, there's big traumas, and there's little traumas. There's levels of trauma that we humans experience. But I think the willingness to be able to talk about these things is what ultimately is going to help us as a species to connect more, and to understand that vulnerability is actually a strength. That vulnerability is actually takes courage to be willing to express. And yeah, so I can see maybe there is a wave of change happening, which is healthy in that
Yeah.
regard.
But I think I was thinking more of outside of your experience in the industry itself, like behind the scenes. Was it
Mhm.
all glamorous? What was the reality for people in the band, in the industry, behind all that glamour? Because
Uh-huh.
right.
Right. Well, I think that at that time in the 80s, so when I was doing a lot of touring in the 80s, there were a lot of drugs, sex, drugs, rock and roll, right? That was the thing. Sex, drugs, rock and roll in the 80s. Um, I think a lot of people were hiding their pain behind the scenes. Not everyone, but it was pretty prevalent at that time. And I think less of that is happening now. I think there tends to be a lot more younger people that are sober, that are anti-drugs, that are talking more about their mental health, which is wonderful. But at that time, I think a lot of people were also repressing a lot of their feelings.
Right, right. And
Mhm.
I think mental health has only recently become a big thing of a conversation, right? More openly.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, which is great. I mean, can you imagine if people in positions of power, like in our government, actually talked about these things? It would be a very different world.
Yes, but it's the reality of our lives, but then we tend to just keep running from the truth of what things really are. But that's another story again.
Exactly.
So, yes, let's move into the other segment of trauma and healing and reinventing yourself. So, what finally became that turning point that pushed you towards healing and becoming more of your authentic self and listening to what was really going on the inside of you?
Yeah, as I sort of mentioned earlier, I think a big turning point for me was right around the age of 40. And right around that time, I was 38, 39. I was married already to someone else. I was married, I had a first marriage, and that person turned out to be very abusive emotionally, and then it evolved into physical abuse. And I finally left that situation. Um, that was sort of a very awakening moment for me. So I was living in California at the time. I was living in LA. I left LA to come back to New York, moved back to New York. And right then, that was the time that I really dove very heavily into my Buddhist practice, therapy, all kinds of personal and spiritual, emotional and spiritual work. And I think my spiritual work was pivotal, was very transformative at that time. And I really needed that foundation to lean on, because at that moment I was really, really fractured and in a lot of pain at that point. But that, because of that moment in time, and that period in my life, my early 40s, it changed the trajectory of my life. And I think if you live long enough, you find, in looking back, you will see these moments in time that are very pivotal moments. And my early childhood was a pivotal moment. My career period was a turning point. My first marriage and getting out of that situation was a pivotal moment. And I've had a few other pivotal moments, since then, now looking at turning 70 in September. So if you're lucky enough to live long, which I hope I have a few more years, you find that, I think, we go through cycles, right? We go through cycles of growth, go through cycles of difficulty and growth, sadness and joy. I mean, these are all the parts of life, of being human. And and it's necessary and good, right?
Yes, part of the getting to a better version of ourselves, or they say remembering, who we are. So, as you mentioned pivotal moments, I realized we never talked about what led you into music and this career. Like, what was that pivotal moment that got you in the industry? Like, how did that happen for you? You never know. Somebody might hear your story and be like, wow, I didn't talk about that before. So I like to share the opportunities that opened people's life to another world.
Well, my mother was a singer, and everyone in my mother's family was a musician. So I came from a musical family. My grandfather was a classical pianist. He taught at the University of Tokyo. You know, we're going back decades, but yeah, my uncles, my mother's brothers were musicians. They were all musical. So my mother, and yeah, this is sort of the beginning of the story, really. My father was being stationed in Japan after World War II, was stationed on the army base in Yokohama. He ended up being the manager of the officers club on base. My mother was singing in little jazz trios and jazz bands and sang in a band that played in the officers club, and that's how my parents met. So it came from my mother. It came from my mother, and I was singing from, as far back as I can remember. And it evolved into me singing in church and singing in school, because I went to Catholic school as a child, and singing in, church choir, becoming a soloist, and then singing weddings and funerals. And that was sort of the beginning of my career. And then it went into me singing in local bands in New Jersey, and that evolving into playing all over the United States with a group that I was with in my teenage years. And then my very first big professional job was when I was 19, 20 years old. I auditioned for the Glenn Miller Orchestra, which, there are these, what they call ghost big bands, because Glenn Miller died during World War II, but his music continued and the band continued. And just like with the Count Basie Orchestra and Maynard Ferguson and all these bands from that dance band, jazz band era, they're still around today. So anyway, that was my first big touring job as a singer, was with the Glenn Miller Orchestra, which is really kind of funny because my mother started out singing jazz, and that was my early musical career influence. And then it went from there into rock and roll and different kinds of music.
Wow,
Yeah.
beautiful. I'm so glad I asked. As you said, pivotal moments. I was like, oh, we haven't talked about how she got into music. Beautiful. My goodness.
Yeah.
So that was like your mom, your family talent, your mom singing kind of brought her into your dad's universe. And then you getting to come to the US, and here you are. I mean, my goodness, it's amazing
Yeah.
how life can just take us on a path, right?
I know. You can't make this stuff up, as they say.
Oh, so you found a new sense of self and purpose in your 60s, as you've written about, or what does reinvention later in life feel like for you?
Yeah, well, the story's in my book, but I had a sort of a turning point after I toured with Sting, which was 1999, 2000. And when I came off that tour, I'm not going to give it all away. Read the book, but after that experience, there was a Screen Actors Guild strike, and I'm a union member. And at that time, my boyfriend, who is now my husband, we've been together for 20 some years. He was writing music for television. So I met him on a commercial. And right at that moment, when I came off the Sting tour, there was a Screen Actors Guild strike, which meant I couldn't work, and neither could Danny, my husband, because we're union members. And so I had to figure out what I wanted to do because I didn't want to go back on the road. I didn't want to look for a job touring. And so I started teaching out of my apartment in New York City voice lessons. And I took an ad out in a magazine, which is now gone, unfortunately, called The Village Voice. And I just took an ad out, singing lessons, vocalist, blah, 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 and a little bit about myself. And I started getting students. And I realized, wow, I really like this. I really liked the whole exchange and feeling like I was, being a positive influence on some young and up and coming singers. And so I started a private practice of teaching voice lessons. And then fast forward, several years, Danny and I moved out of Manhattan and we bought a house upstate where I am now. And that turned into me in my 50s getting my bachelor's degree. Then I went back to school. I got my bachelor's degree primarily online through SUNY Empire State, and they have an amazing program where you can get credits for your life experience. It requires a lot of paper writing and a lot of work in order to get the credits. But I did that for my bachelor's, so I was able to get my bachelor's degree in like 2.5 years, which was amazing. And then I went to NYU for my master's degree. And now I've been teaching at NYU at the Clive Davis Institute for 12 years. So I never planned on this. It just sort of evolved over time. And, it just kind of naturally evolved out of finding teaching, realizing that I was pretty good at it and I enjoyed it. And then, deciding to go back to school. And, it was really a process over several years. Yeah. And I never imagined I'd be doing this now.
Wow, another pivotal moment, right?
Yes.
My gosh, led you into another thing. So for listeners who look successful externally but feel empty internally, what would you want them to know?
I want them to know that they're not alone, number one. Even when it feels like you're the only one feeling the kind of pain or sadness or depression in your life that you might be feeling, you're not alone, that it's a very human experience, and that it's so important to reach out for help. Whether it's talking to your priest or finding a therapist or an elder, someone that you trust. But it's so important to come out of your comfort zone of where you are right now and maybe feeling stuck, that there is a way out. And there could be several ways out. And I, at this point in my life, I've tried many different ways that I could tell you about. But there's always a way out. Yeah. Out and up.
Yes, just keep moving,
Yeah.
even if you have to crawl, right? Sometimes
Yes.
life hit us down And all we have is strength to just crawl another day.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
I've been hit down myself, and I'm smiling now, and I'm so grateful because there were times
Yeah.
when I was not smiling. So we
I
all
hear
probably
you.
have a dark night of the soul. And so if you're someone who's
Yeah.
listening and you're going through that, just know, take a breath. There is a rainbow, there is a smile, there's a sunlight on the other side of that. You don't have to give
Yes.
in to that
Yes.
place.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I so relate to that, Simone. I was telling you about my first marriage, and when I came back to New York, I was literally in fetal position at that moment in time. And I remember the feeling of feeling like there was no way out. There was no way beyond how I was feeling in that moment. So, for anybody listening that may be feeling like that right now, I'm here to tell you, and so are you. We're here to say to people that there is always a way out, and it does get better. And you just have to have faith and trust that whether it's God that you believe in, whether it's the universe, whether it's whatever higher power that speaks to you, um, you will find the guidance that you need. So
Yes.
yeah,
And the strength for another day. Sometimes it's just another hour, another day.
right.
But, just reach out to somebody to say, help, I
Yeah.
need help, or something, or something.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
so, why was now the right time for you to finally tell your story publicly?
I don't know that there's ever a right time. Um, but someone had a few friends of mine at one point said, you really should write your story. It's really interesting. And I always thought, who cares? Who's going to care? Nobody's going to care. Um, and then for some reason, I started journaling and just writing, some stories down. And then I just found myself coming back to taking a day on the weekend, and I just started writing, and I just kept coming back. And then after over 2.5 years, almost 3 years later, I realized, oh, I have enough here for a book. Oh, wow. How did this happen? And then I was very, very fortunate that a friend of mine knew this woman who is sort of a PR person. And she knew a woman who runs this little book company. And I reached out to her and I told her my story. And lo and behold, she said, oh, I want to publish your book. So
Wow.
it, you know, right time, right place, whatever it was meant to be. So, yeah, thank you, Terry. Thank you, Eileen. Thank you, everybody, for making the connections. Again, we don't do these things alone, right? None of us do these things alone. So I was very lucky. Yeah.
Yes. And how that's such a nugget for people. There's so many people who have books in them, but are so afraid at how monumentous it might look and feel. I came out with
Hmm.
my book as well, and it was through going through a writing process and just kind of just dumping out what was inside of you, kind of like journaling. So that's one
Yeah.
way. I was always a journaler, but I just didn't realize that all that stuff that was going on, the conversations in my head and in my body, and I would see things everywhere. And I just started writing, and lo and behold, I had 80,000 words. I was like, wow. And so,
It's amazing.
yeah, so for people
Yeah.
who are thinking it's so monumentous, start journaling. Take that little nugget there from Machan. Just start journaling and getting things out of you that is just locked up on the inside, trying to get out, just get a pen and paper, or even a typewriter, whatever you have, a computer, an iPad, a phone
Hmm.
on your notepad. Just start getting it out of your head, out of your heart, of your body, and you'll be amazed. Sometimes you feel better. I do feel better once I journal and I let things out of my body and out of my mind.
Oh, absolutely. I think even though I didn't have the intention of writing a book, what happened for me was just getting the stories out of, like you say, out of your mind, out of your body was very cathartic. It was incredibly cathartic for me. And I feel now that by actually putting it out in the world, I've I've had this sense of release and relief, and I don't care, at this point in my life, of course, we all want to be liked and we all want to have a sense of, support and good reception and all of that. But the bottom line for me is I'm not really worried about what people are thinking about my stories or my book. It was really just a personal process that I needed to go through. So I really did it for myself.
Right. And what I have learned through the writing process, many people who write books do not get rich. So if you're thinking you're going to write a book to get rich, please take that off the list. I did not get rich. I'm still here trying to sell my book one by one.
Right.
Don't have a marketing budget. I didn't get a publishing deal because I don't have a
Right.
big name. And so, but sometimes it's very healing to do that. So don't make the end goal or the outcome be big money or big bucks. Make it,
Hmm.
it's a healing process for you
Yes.
to get these things out of your mind, out of your body. And sometimes once you have it on paper, you can make sense of these stories that were just locked up inside of you. So,
Absolutely. And absolutely. And by the way, just because I got a publishing deal, there was no money exchange. There was no money. No, 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 no. It was only that this little company out of Europe took my manuscript and they did the work of helping me put it together and get it out there, on Amazon and all the different book sites. But I did not make money from this publishing deal. So I'm in the same boat, basically. It's not a money making thing.
exactly my point. Thank you for underlining that. So,
Yeah.
so in wrapping up, what do you hope immigrant women, especially Asian American women, should take away from your Naked Out Loud book?
Haha. Well, um, particularly because of growing up with my mother, who was Japanese, of course, and understanding the culture through her. Um, there is this concept of saving face in Japanese culture, you may have heard of. And saving face means that you don't do things or say things that are going to embarrass you or embarrass someone else or is disrespectful to yourself or disrespectful to someone else. And um, so I actually opened my book up with this whole idea that um, from the Japanese point of view, it may be embarrassing or shameful that I'm talking about my personal life in the way that I have in my book. But I decided that um, I wanted to rewrite the concept of what it means to save face. That really, what it really means is finding your authentic self, that there is no shame. There's no shame in telling the truth about how you feel. And that's what I want young Asian American, especially Japanese American youth and women in particular, to know that there's no shame, that shame is a construct. Shame is a concept that was made up by probably men, probably somewhere along the line, um, and particularly for women, right? So I think that's the big message is there is no shame in telling the truth. and speaking your truth.
Oh, that is so, so, so powerful. Shame was invented, right, to keep us bound, to keep us in fear, to keep us in the dark, to keep us away
Yes.
from who we truly are. That is just so powerful. So, what would you say today to you, the younger version of yourself who felt invisible and out of place back in those days in New Jersey, with your big round glasses, as you said, you know?
Oh my God. Oh, that it's going to be okay, and that you're enough, that you're good enough just the way you are, that you don't need to be ashamed of being different, that you're just as good as anyone else and you deserve to be here just like everyone else who's here. And if my younger self knew that, I probably would have been in a very different place emotionally, spiritually, as an adult.
Right. And imagine you fought through all of the challenges that you faced at home and socially and other places, and you had that fire in your belly, like you mentioned. Imagine if you were your healed self back then, what you could have done, right? I often think
Yes.
that if I was unhindered, what's one memorable cultural faux pas or awkward misunderstanding or welcome to America or something surprising that probably still surprises you today? Like, why do they do that here? Or maybe it's in Japan after you've been here all these years and you go there, you're like, oh, that's surprising. Why do they do that? They don't do that back home. That still
Uh-huh.
makes you laugh, cringe, or even cry today.
Wow. Yeah, there's probably many moments I could talk about, but I think I think the one that comes to mind is, and I'm not going to say who it was because I might get in trouble, but um, it was one of the tours that I did, pretty big artist, and he and a few other guys in the band would jokingly call me Tokyo Rose or Susie Wong, right? Which nowadays would be, just a horror, But then, and when I was younger, and when these things would happen to me, I would just make fun. And rather, I mean, this is survival mechanism. So I would like, oh, so I would make a joke. I would make a joke about it, or I would imitate a caricature of what an Asian person probably looked like to them, or was depicted in the movies back in the day, right? In the 50s and 60s. Um, how Chinese and Japanese people were depicted with big round glasses and buck teeth and speaking with, ridiculous accent. And so anyway, I kind of did that. And when I look at that now, it's a cringe, moment for sure. But at the same time, it also helped build strength because I learned how to be a duck and just let it roll off my back and not stop me. And I think that's really important, is to not let any kind of discrimination or any kind of comments coming from people that are discriminatory to not get to you. You can't take that stuff in because it'll destroy you, you know. So we have to learn to like let it roll and just keep going, you know.
That's a powerful lesson. Yes. Another speaker, another of our guests said, reminds us not to take on people's biases. And so you're definitely underlining that. And
Yeah.
sometimes we find ways to survive until we can thrive, right? And that was
Yeah.
one of them. Because I was thinking, how did you manage as a young female in an industry like that, in the system, in the 60s, that was probably so paternalistic? How did you survive? How did you stay safe? How did, like, but you've given us little windows into things you did to, make it
Hmm.
to where you are today, and stay safe, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I count my blessings. I count my blessings. So, yeah.
Right. So, is there anything that I did not ask you that you'd like to share about your book?
Um, Gosh, I think we covered a lot of good stuff. I hope people will buy it and read it. And I would love to hear from people. You know, they can go to my website and actually contact me if they want. If there's any questions, I'm really open to talking, further to people about my story. So, yeah, no, I'm really, thankful that you had me on your podcast. And again, like I said, I think it's wonderful that you're doing this.
Thank you for being courageous in that. Your story is such a powerful reminder that healing and reinvention are possible at all stages of life. So for our listeners, we'll link the Naked Out Loud in the show notes and other details for Machan.
Great.
And until
Thank you.
next time, keep decoding, keep healing, and keep honoring the story beneath the surface. Thank you so much, Machan.
Thank you. Thank you, Simone. Thank you.